Those boroughs are Barnet, Brent, Southwark, Westminster and RBKC. Today we'll take you through the outputs of the project so far, invite your feedback and input, and then go into a workshop where you can help us think about how this mapping work could be used across London in different forms and applications, help us understand what the potential user needs are and user stories are across the city, and help us develop some ideas for further iterations of the map going forward. So without further ado, I think we'll move into doing the show and tell. So if you go forward, Onyeka. Yeah, so we've got about 40 minutes for the show and tell. We will then head into the workshop part of today. As I mentioned before, the show and tell will cover everything we've done so far. We haven't quite finished all of the outputs, but we'll give you as much detail as we can on everything that's ready and done. And then we'll invite you to give us your feedback. So I think I've kind of done my intro bit really. So let's move forward to the show and tell, and let's get started. I'll hand over to Rhoda, who's going to introduce the project.
Right. Okay. Good afternoon, all. I'm Rhoda Phillips. I'm the Digital Inclusion and Talent Lead for Westminster and has been part of this project. And as Jay set out, this project was one of the two LOTI funded projects. It's a COVID innovation project. And you know, as we all know, COVID has exacerbated the digital needs of our communities, and it has for us in Westminster, and I think it's exactly the same for everybody here who's on the call, that it highlighted the need to have a deeper understanding of the nature and extent of exclusion in our communities. And if we were to help our communities better and more effectively at sustainability, we said that we need to really do that. And because digital inclusion is very complex, it's very multifaceted. And so we really need to have evidence and data-led approach to truly understand its extent and nature. Also, to tackle the digital inclusion challenges, it also needs bringing together multiple expertise and great collaboration to get the outcomes we are trying to achieve here. And this project has really did it for us. As Jay was saying, it's a multi-borough collaboration project of Barnet, of Brent, of Kensington and Chelsea, Southwark and Westminster, and GLA. And it has been such a joy that we have been together and you know, with all the expertise that's brought. So at the onset, we aim to build together a robust digital exclusion map using open and local data sets and understand the softer aspects of exclusion through resident insights from phone interviews, from our persona analysis and face-to-face service, which you will hear more along in the next couple of slides. So in addition to that as well, this project also aimed to build a toolkit that yourselves and other LAs can use in your own digital inclusion journey. So in terms of like approach, what we're looking, how did we do this? So in terms of approach, we have, it's built on existing and completed work that Westminster did earlier on, that late last year, and we started building that inclusion map. And from there on, we've looked at the other local authorities and you know, that's really, can you hear the feedback? So for example, in this project in particular, Westminster have completed the phase 1 mapping we've done, and we've done the needs analysis and persona work. So we built from there, and rather than starting from scratch, this COVID innovation funded project built on that. And all of the other local authorities, as you know, are very different in terms of where we are in our digital inclusion journey. And so we've built in that one as well. And also in terms of the persona mapping, we've also built like from Westminster's initial work, and we've made that into a pan-London persona bank, and exactly the same as what we've done with the digital inclusion map. So in terms of like focusing on both the extent and nature of digital exclusion, so we've talked about, the softer aspects. It's not just about where they are in the borough, where they are in the city, but also what the needs and the barriers are in terms of the exclusion aspect. And also this project has also given us the opportunity to really learn from others. So for example, in terms of data, Brent has been really good in terms of looking at data governance, and there are other aspects as well wherein other boroughs have contributed to the expertise. So that's we've been looking at the collaboration aspect of this project, but also at the end of it all, the most important thing is that we've made this project replicable, and this is a time wherein we're looking at that, and this is the show and tell wherein you can actually be able to use this map and look at how you're going to tailor and target interventions in your boroughs. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Ian for him to show you the map itself.
Thanks, Rhoda. I'll just share my screen. If you guys could let me know when you can see that.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, so my name's Ian. I'm a data scientist from Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster. And I'm just going to show you the map that the GLA made for this project. So in addition to individual maps that were made for the individual boroughs, the GLA's put this together as a pan-London map. And it's developed using multiple publicly available data sets selected by the 5 participating boroughs and put together by the GLA. So thanks very much to Paul and Malgorzata from the GLA City Data team for putting this together. And before I start, I'll just point out that there wasn't, we made a deliberate choice in this not to create an overall index for digital exclusion, which would often be used for intervention cases like this, but instead we've created different cohorts depending on who we'd like to target in this. So as you can see in the map here, we have multiple layers that could be turned on and off in the GIS system, and underneath you'll see the legend. So the data has been put in here for the entire GLA, and in the dark outline you can see the 5 participating boroughs in this pilot scheme. What you can see in the green at the moment is the residents that are 65 and over and 75 and over in higher proportions, because that's one of the cohorts we chose to focus on. So each individual cohort has data sets that go behind it. So for older people, we're focusing on census data from the ONS. There's another cohort focusing on low-income families, and that will have information data from the Department of Education and deprivation amongst children, which I believe is part of the indices of multiple deprivation data set. There's one from unemployment, a cohort for unemployment, which focuses on job seekers, job seeker allowances, and indices of multiple deprivation. And these can be individually looked at or combined with other data sets. So if you wanted to focus on disability and unemployment, you can do that and then zoom into specific areas that you might be interested in. So disability has a mental health index and disability living allowance. And then there's also a layer for businesses, small and medium enterprises. And there's an overall layer for context profiles, which has kind of categorized data in it based on neighborhoods, which gets quite complicated. For a show and tell like this, that's something that you might have to look at in your own time, but just to show you that's there. So in addition to this pan-London map, the GLA has put together a story map which focuses on a specific cohort. So I'll just flip over to that quickly and show you. And this is a work in progress, so you'll notice that some of the script in here hasn't been filled in, and that's because this is literally hot off the press and it's just been created. And this is a case study looking at older people. So here you can see the spatial distribution of older people across London. And then that's been overlaid with the deprivation from the indices of multiple deprivation. also areas that don't have high broadband coverage. And then you can see one with libraries and community centers. And what this allows you to do, if I just zoom in, is if I look at the northern bit of Kensington and Chelsea, I can see the areas that have a high proportion of older people in this orange hash. If I go to the next tab, that's been overlaid with indices of multiple deprivation. So the darker the color, the higher the level of deprivation. So the dark color is 20% highest deprived areas on a national scale. And also can get pop-ups, so you can see that that's in the 14th percentile for deprivation, and it gives you the percentage of over 65s and over 75s. So I can see that not all areas with older people are necessarily deprived. And if I want to see how that affects broadband speed, I can see that actually broadband speed probably isn't a contributing factor in digital exclusion for these people, in the sense that they should have decent access to broadband. But I've noticed that this area has high percentage of older people and is very deprived. So maybe I want to run an intervention so I can look at community facilities and see that there's a library here. So maybe this would be a good place to run an intervention where we look at what's affecting digital exclusion in this area, whether it's access or confidence or skills or anything like that. So like I said, this is a work in progress, but it's the idea of focusing on individual groups and being able to overlay the layers to create a clear outlook. So that's a very brief introduction into what we're doing with the mapping and what the GLA's produced for London so far. And I will pass back to you, Rhoda.
I'll just quickly add to that, Ian, thank you for going through that. We're planning to develop more of those story maps for the different key groups we've identified. And those key groups that we picked for the mapping have been identified through the research that was done at Westminster and then validated across the rest of the boroughs. So that's why we selected those groups as being most likely to help understand digital exclusion. Pass over now to Sade, who will talk about the personas, which will help you be able to fine-tune those interventions based on the needs identified through the mapping work.
Thanks, Jay. So as Jay said, Westminster carried out 20 interviews to create these user personas. So they then split them up into 7 different groups. So you have beneficiaries of existing digital support, you have unemployed people, you have low-income families, homeless people, disabled people, vulnerable people aged 65 plus, and then you have micro and SME businesses. The work we did as the other boroughs is to validate this data. So what we did was, or validate these user personas, sorry. We had workshops, so both internal and external workshops, and we basically asked them, does this seem consistent with the people that you see coming to your service or your organizations? So following that, we then got feedback from these different departments, and then we also had a workshop to talk about what the different parts of the council these people interact with. So as a homeless person, which services will you interact with? Just so we know, if we were to target interventions, what are the different key touch points within the council? We've also realized that these people fall into different groups and they're not actually mutually exclusive. So you could have unemployed people that are also homeless. You could have disabled people that are also homeless, like some of them fall within several groups. And in order to build upon the work Westminster have done, we've also identified that there are other user groups. So we're looking at care leavers, which we've added to the group, adults with low numeracy and literacy skills. We're also looking at people with multiple disadvantages and people from traveller communities. And I think just in terms of how we use this information going forward, there are things like considering these type of people when we're carrying out our projects, especially in light of the pandemic. So understanding what their needs are and how we can target the interventions that way. We're also thinking about how many people exactly reside in our boroughs. So that's where the map comes in to understand the different stories and understand where they're situated in the borough so that we can target interventions and provide them with services more effectively. And then the link to the LOTI Persona Bank, Oyenka has just shared in the chat. I'm just going to pass on to Rhoda, I think.
It's me. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks, Onyeka. So as Sade mentioned, there were kind of different groups with, oh no, back one, please. Yeah, so as Sade mentioned, there were different groups than those personas, and one of those groups was on beneficiaries of individuals who had kind of benefited from the digital inclusion support that had come from each of the councils as a response to the pandemic. So what we then did is some qualitative research with residents who had benefited from digital inclusion support over the past year to really understand in more detail what the challenges were to them receiving that support, what the benefits were, and how we could take that forward as we kind of developed our more long-term strategy. So in total, we interviewed 16 residents from across Brent, Barnet and Southwark, and these were kind of split into 3 different service user groups. So they were the unemployed or those receiving skills training, individuals with learning disabilities, or individuals and families who'd been home learning during the pandemic. And the majority of these service users had received devices and connectivity in some circumstances as well to kind of aid them accessing digital technology. So what the feedback kind of showed us was how different devices worked for different user groups. So for example, that tablets worked really well for those with learning disabilities. Actually, Chromebooks were perfect for home learning because they kind of had the keyboards and the webcams and could allow them to interact. But also that where we'd all put in these devices as councils for particular areas, so with learning disabilities, it was about replacing their day centres and having those activities. Actually, by having those devices at home, it increased confidence in a lot of different areas, and it wasn't just limited to accessing that specific area of support. I think I'm always going to remember one gentleman who fed back he had learning disabilities, that because he'd been talking to people throughout the pandemic through his device, he was now actually leaving the pandemic more confident to talk to people face to face because he developed that skill more and more while being at home. So it's really helpful to kind of understand how this had impacted individuals and how we can take that forward. And the other feedback on that was kind of the respite it also provided, so for either caregivers or parents, and actually how we could explore that further going forward. So there are more details about the full research report and kind of quotes there in the link in that slide. I think I'm handing over to Curtis.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. So yeah, in addition to the mapping work, which kind of showed us the uneven spatial distribution of where potentially vulnerable people were, and the persona research that gave us some real in-depth information about particular groups of people, their needs, we also conducted a survey across Westminster and also Kensington and Chelsea. The idea of this survey was to better understand the incidence of the barriers and the attitudes that we uncovered in the persona research, trying to understand exactly, how those needs differ between different key groups, whether particular groups were significantly more likely to face particular types of barriers. We ended up conducting over 800 interviews across both of those boroughs, and those insights came to us just a few weeks ago, so we're in the middle of analysing those at the moment. We got insights from 4 key groups identified by the persona research. So those were those over 60, those with a disability or caring for someone with a disability, unemployed people, and also those on low income under £20,000 a year as well. And so the idea was that all of this information would help us to better target our interventions and understand residents' needs and concerns. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Onyeka. So, as I said, we finished this survey in the field. It was a face-to-face survey earlier this month, so we're still going through the data and pulling out the findings, but we thought we'd share with you some of the high-level findings from the survey so far. So the first real key takeaway was that our map of vulnerability to digital exclusion that we made with the GLA was instrumental in finding eligible respondents for the survey and the success of the survey. So that was a real useful tool that helped us to find and engage with digitally excluded residents as a really good form of validation that the map worked. We found that more than a third of respondents actually said that they'd not accessed the internet in the last 12 months. And of those, only about 2% had already taken steps to help them get online. And almost a third said that they actually had no interest in using it and nothing would persuade them to use it as well, particularly those aged over 60. And so from a behaviour change perspective, this suggests that quite a few respondents are still at that pre-contemplation stage. Other than lack of interest, confidence and skills were generally the most significant barriers to digital inclusion. So more than a third of our internet users said that they weren't very or at all confident in using the internet. And over half of those actually lacked confidence, or those that didn't still admitted that they've got some gaps in the skills that they need for their personal work life. About 1 in 10 non-internet users said that a free device would most likely encourage them to use the internet in the future. So that just backs up what a lot of us know, that it's not just about giving people devices. There are so many other barriers to inclusion. And across all 4 groups that we surveyed, social activities were the most important perceived benefit of accessing the internet. And less than 1 in 10 said that accessing information was important, and very few, about 3%, actually wanted to use it to contact organisations like councils. And then we also found that unemployed respondents were much more likely than average to access the internet in a library or community centre or other public space. And of those that wanted to develop their skills, about 1 in 5 actually wanted to receive training in a community place, but actually less than 1 in 10 had already received that help from someone in the community. So, as I said, these are just initial insights coming out of the survey, and there's plenty more that we can delve into, and a lot of deep dives and analysis and thematic analysis that we can do. And so one of the next steps is to segment the data. So we're planning to use some different machine learning techniques, a data up approach to segment the survey responses based on residents' shared barriers, their attitudes and opinions. And then when we couple that with demographic information, then these segments are going to really help us to identify and target the most vulnerable residents more effectively.
Thank you, Curtis. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rajiv Kumar. I'm from Westminster City Council. I'm a project manager working on digital inclusion with Rhoda and the team. You've heard from Rhoda in terms of how we brought together, with the help of LOTI, 5 separate partners, plus the GLA, plus LOTI, plus other people who played a role in some of the work that's been done behind the scenes. You've also heard from Sade and Maddie about some of the sensitivities, the barriers and challenges people face, as well as the potential benefits of driving out digital exclusion and helping people to become more digitally included and gain benefits that come with that. From Curtis, you've also seen the work, and from Ian, the mapping work that we've done. You've seen the large amounts of data that we've used to be able to bring out some of those insights, both in terms of the survey work, but also the mapping data. So there were major concerns that we had to address around ethics, governance, and communications, as the slide says there, to ensure that we were transparent, we were considered trustworthy in what we were doing, how we were doing it, and why we were doing it, and therefore we could be held accountable for our approach, for our actions, and how this information insights would potentially be used downstream. So governance and communications and an ethical lens were seen by the project team as being critical to the success of our work. We developed an open and inclusive approach to the work we did, in ensuring that we brought everybody along and we could demonstrate to a wider audience the transparency and integrity of the work we were doing. I have to say that as challenging as it's been, LOTI played an instrumental role in the work that we've done in providing cloud tools for supporting collaboration across boundaries, which across multiple authorities, I'm sure you're aware, is not always an easy thing to do, and that's worked really well for us. But more importantly and fundamentally, I think LOTI have created a culture which supports inclusion, but it also supports honesty and it supports fairness across multiple partners, often where you may have competing and conflicting original objectives. And I think over the last, how many, 6-7 months, it's been a long journey, but I think it's helped us to really drive the outcomes that we were looking to achieve. Given the large volumes of data, and the insights we're generating around digital inclusion, and that is being presented to DI leads and to service leaders, as well as other stakeholders who will then be using that to make decisions around services and support and capabilities that we develop. There was a concern as to whether there were ethical implications around what we were doing. We did, given the amounts of data we've got, do the usual data protection impact assessments. We looked at GDPR. Through the data that you've seen and the mapping you've seen, we're not holding any personal data at that level. It's all aggregated and it's from open sources. However, we also looked at the ethical frameworks and we chose GDS. There are others out there, including the Open Data Institute and multiple others that you can look at. But I think a key aspect to these is they actually start to bring in not just what you're doing and how you, what data you're holding, how you're using that data and storing it, but they also start to think about the wider implications of the decisions being made by analysing this information and allow you to create transparency, openness and integrity in supporting the justification for your decision making. To summarise, I think collaboration is hard and it can be painful at times, but it pays off dividends massively if you bring together the right partners. And I think this is a testament, the outputs that you see are a testament to that. Focus on transparency now will drive better outcomes and better quality outcomes and decisions going further downstream in delivering your initiatives. We would encourage you to take a lens on data ethics, whichever framework you choose to use, over and above the traditional legal and compliance legislation and regulatory requirements, because I think it will provide you with insights to your transformation programs in terms of the potential outcomes, particularly in the public domain. And finally, I guess I would ask you to remember it's equally important to do the right thing as well as doing things right. At this stage, I would like to hand back, I think, is it Helen next?
No, it's me, Rajiv.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Yeka, could I have the next slide, please? So, oh, no, one before that, sorry. The one before that, please. Thank you. So, appreciate that we've given you a very whistle-stop tour of the work that we've done in digital exclusion. We can't really do it justice in the last 30 minutes. So what we've done is bring all of this learning together in a digital exclusion toolkit, which we'll put the link on the site for you very shortly. The toolkit brings together all of the areas that we've discussed this morning. It brings together the map, and it should be read in conjunction and complements the map very closely. It talks about the Pan-London persona information that Sade mentioned, and also the detailed voice of the digitally excluded residents, which Maddie talked about, and also the survey that Curtis mentioned. So all of the information that we've just spoken about is in our toolkit. The toolkit's been designed to support other councils to filter and draw insights from the map and how that you could use it locally for your residents or your cohorts of customers that you may work with. So whilst it is very LA focused, we do see this map and the toolkit being used by others across London and hopefully across the UK. The map and the toolkit is designed so it can replicate the work that we've already done and also take on board some of the learnings we've had, which Rajiv just mentioned. And it is we are going to be iterating this work over the next few months and probably years as we become more mature around digital exclusion and learn more. So just because you've seen it today doesn't mean it won't change in 6 months. Do come back and have a look at it, because we will keep changing it. And I think that's it from me. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's there, use it, and we will keep adding to it. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, and in that spirit, in helping us to understand what we will add to it and how we'll iterate it, that's why we're holding the workshop in the next section. I'll kind of explain how this is all lined up in terms of project governance and other bits and pieces. So this first piece of work was funded through the COVID Innovation Fund. As we continue to develop the map in its next phase, that bit of work will be funded as part of LOTI's Digital Inclusion Innovation Programme, which is funded by the GLA. So we're really interested to hear your ideas, to understand who would like to work with us on developing this map further. And the other great part of this is there is kind of money on the table and resources to make stuff happen here. So we're really keen to understand what those user needs are, what you'd like to see, and where you'd like to take this, and welcome you to join our collaboration that we've been running so far as we expand it to include more boroughs. So let's